Welcome to the SparkRoom webinar series. SparkRoom provides full-service, data-driven marketing and technology solutions to ignite your performance marketing. Our webinars provide actionable advice and insight to help you better strategize, execute, analyze, and optimize your marketing campaign efforts.
We offer our solutions in three formats: performance marketing technology, enrollment marketing, and enrollment management. Marcelo Parravicini is our presenter, a seasoned executive with 2 decades of marketing, enrollment, management, and operational expertise. Marcelo's experience include works in all areas of business and institutional management, including strategic planning, organizational realignment, change management, marketing and communications, enrollment management, and more. Marcelo has a wealth of higher education experience from his tenures as CMO at ECPI University and Post University, where he helped drive enrollment volume from 800 to nearly 15,000 students. Before joining the SparkRoom team, he worked with Johnson & Wales University as a consultant, advising them on how to build out an integrated enrollment management organization. As a result of that effort, online enrollments at Johnson & Wales grew by 30%. So thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Good afternoon, Marcelo. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to get going.
Me too, and thank you for that introduction.
So, first, tell me how you found yourself within the EDU space.
It was an accident. Somebody came to me with $1,000 through a PayPal account and asked me if I could help a friend figure out how to optimize a website to get more applicants into an executive MBA program. At the time, I was working in digital marketing. Specifically, I was a strategist for the pharmaceutical industry. So, well, to make a long story short, I don't know how exactly it happened, but I went from pharmaceuticals to education over doing somebody a favor. Yeah.
And then how did that lead you to the position at Post?
Well, shortly after, getting the opportunity of helping an executive MBA program figure out how to optimize their organic search, right? I found myself having conversations with people about what I had done. And I was introduced by a good friend of mine to a person who had recently gone into an acquisition. Post University had been acquired in 2004 by a group that wanted to grow an online operation. And I was approached by those people to manage primarily their digital marketing, for which I had a great deal of experience, and most importantly, because I had recently been exposed to education, they thought I should be able to help them manage or coordinate marketing efforts.
So what were some of the challenges they were facing that helped them identify you could help?
Well, I think first and foremost, there were a number of challenges. And I don't necessarily think they knew that I could help address those challenges or not. So let me take a little bit of a step back. I don't think the organization as a whole really understood the challenges we had. Okay. There were a lot of assumptions that had been made. We thought admissions was working well, that we had the operational infrastructure that could handle whatever we would put into the funnel, if you will. So I think to begin with, they looked at me as a person with a great deal of digital marketing experience who understood also how to drive interest for higher education. And so we approached this as a purely marketing challenge. I not necessarily took the time to look at the many challenges the institution had at first, holistically, to really understand what the challenges were. So on that note, shortly after arriving at Post University, and shortly after getting the marketing on track, getting the marketing moving, and beginning to build a funnel, increasing demand for our programs at Post, we realized that we were unable to effectively manage that funnel, and we were not realizing the conversions we thought we would realize, and that led to us taking a deeper dive into the operation and trying to figure out what was wrong. And just to give you an idea of what happened within the second year of our operation, we go in year one just trying to get our arms around the challenges. By going into year two, we understand what needs to be done, and that's when we find that we had at one point put somewhere in the neighborhood of 11,000 to 12,000 inquiries through the funnel, through the system, and not a single one of those had been contacted by admissions. Now, it gives you an idea of what was going on, right?
So what was their inquiry outreach process when you started?
Typically the way it works, ideally, is when somebody requests information from an institution, especially for distance education programs, you want to reach back to them as soon as possible. And part of the reason why is because this is, online education or distance education is very competitive landscape. So you have institutions out there that are fully capable of getting back to someone within a matter of minutes of them having requested information. So they did not have that in place. So we looked at how come we're not getting the conversions, and we thought we had the admissions infrastructure in place we needed, and then we came to realize what? We came to realize that there was not system in place to deliver inquiries anywhere near real time to admissions reps, for example. We thought there was a system in place. The way the legacy CRM and the legacy student information system had been integrated was not really achieving what we needed to achieve in terms of speed of delivery of inquiries to realize any type of speed to call. So right off the bat, we were at a significant disadvantage with the other institutions.
So then once you were able to identify all of that, what was your plan of action to address this speed to lead issue?
Well, at the time was also coming to the realization that just like we had overlooked that detail, we knew there were other details we needed to address. So we took a big step back. You need to look at the operational holistically, right? So if you're unable to respond to an inquiring prospect within a given amount of time, and the time frame that's competitive given the landscape, right? What else is that you're unable to do? For example, let me actually take a slightly different approach. If you take the time to do a competitive analysis, you'll get some insight into how these other institutions that are well prepared to manage these funnels, these return adult students that are interested in online education, right? You'll find how they are able to not only respond to inquiries, but also how they manage application materials. Okay, so we took a step back and we looked at, by benchmarking competitive practices, we took a look at what our capabilities were. So yes, call center capabilities, for example, our ability to get back to someone as soon as possible, but also what would happen once a transcript was received, what would happen once an application was received, and so on, and the degree to which we had a coordinated and synchronized effort to effectively manage an inquiring prospect through application and then registration.
Okay. So how were you able to link all of those components together when often they're in different departments, different teams?
And well, that's exactly right. That was ultimately, you have to look at what is the core of the problem. The core of the problem isn't necessarily that you're taking too long to process a transcript. The core of the problem is that in addition to that, right, a lot of these functions operate in silo. So the various moving parts that will allow you to effectively manage an applicant or a committed inquiring prospect willing to apply into registration do not communicate with one another, do not synchronize their efforts, do not collaborate, and that's the foundation, right? So ultimately the core of the problem is lack of integration, collaboration in various functional areas working in silo. The question becomes, which are then the functional areas that must be integrated, coordinated, and which are the efforts that must be synchronized so that your operation is able to compete at the same level with other institutions that have their operational act together.
So once you establish, you talked a little bit how you increased inquiry flow, and then you realized you had this contact issue. How were you able to scale and train the internal team to react to these inbound inquiries?
Well, ultimately, look, there are a couple of things you have to look at. Scaling. When you go into a challenge of this type, right? So you're thinking about in terms of who may be listening today. You have an institution, most likely a traditional institution with well-established online, traditional on-ground programs with a small presence online or no presence online, trying to figure out how do we manage both the marketing side and the admission side, the marketing and sales, if you will, of online for our online programs. And the first thing you have to look at is, okay, do you understand the metrics of success? Okay. So if you have an admissions rep that's specialized to manage, trained to respond to an inquiry as they come in, so, you have the systems in place that allows for the speedy delivery of an inquiry to a enrollment advisor or enrollment counselor. By the way, systems do not have to be, technology necessarily. It could be manual systems. In fact, at Post University, we began by, and I kid you not, printing out every time we received an inquiry. We had an email confirmation of the inquiry being received. We printed the email and delivered that email within a matter of 2 minutes to the admissions counselor that we had sitting in a room with a phone in front of him or her, and they would immediately attempt the first call.
You killed a few trees, huh?
We killed a couple of trees. I hate to admit it, but we did. So you start there, right? And eventually, down the line, somewhere along the line, you'll manage to get a CRM in place and integrate that with the student information system and so on, and you can achieve some form of real-time delivery of electronic data to reps so that they can react as inquiries come in. But now you have, a manual process in place, or perhaps you have some systems in place. Either way, once that you achieve that delivery time, you got to make absolutely certain that people understand what happens. Ultimately, when all is said and done, admissions is working towards a goal, an admissions role, right? Whatever that may be, 100 students, 50, 20, you may have goals that are specific to degree programs. Regardless of how you look at it, you need to understand the metrics that go into conversion for online education. Just to give you a number, so if you fail to reach back to inquiring prospects within a half an hour of that inquiry being received, depending on what white paper you read, the probability of conversion decreases by anywhere between 65% and 75%. So let's call it, let's split the difference. Let's call it 70%. I mean, either way, even if it was 60%, it's horrific. So the impact on your efforts, your marketing dollars, and so on is significant right off the bat if you're unable to get back to people. So that's part of the training process, right? When you hire, train, or perhaps you transition someone from your main campus admissions team to your online admissions, the first thing you have to make sure that people understand is what are the metrics of success. So once you have that, once that you understand that the people understand, how quickly they need to call, how many attempts per day they need to make, how many attempts they're going to make the first week, how they're going to integrate call attempts with email follow-up communications and so on, then you start to identify the metrics that will help you scale your operation. There is a number of inquiries, for example, on a weekly basis that if you deliver above that number per enrollment advisor, you will realize diminishing returns because the probability of them being able to, for example, reach out to these prospective students within a given amount of time, on average, decreases when they have too many calls they have to make, right? Not to mention that as they reach people, they're going to have additional calls mixed into their daily routine just to engage in follow-up with people that they have already spoken to. Right. So those metrics, understanding how many new inquiries per day they can effectively manage while achieving a speed to call time frame that's competitive, and while being able to manage those people that have engaged, applied, and so on, are the metrics that once identified will allow you to scale your marketing. The problem oftentimes is, and this is what I was telling you earlier back in Post University, you have a situation where somewhere between, I don't know, let's just call it 12,000 inquiries were delivered into a system, an admissions system, and they were never contacted, right? Nobody made an attempt to reach out to them. Well, why? Because the marketing was scaled ahead of ensuring the operation was basically synchronized, if you will.
So I know that many institutions have marketing and admissions or recruitment really separated. So how do how are you able to kind of bridge that gap and pull those teams together?
There are two ways to approach these. It depends on the institution. First and foremost, one of the challenges is that, typically the scenario is you have a traditional university, on-ground campus or campuses, and an admissions department, and the various functional areas that support admissions are or were designed a long time ago to serve the needs of that traditional on-ground operation. Just to, and I know I'm oversimplifying this somewhat, but just to give you a little perspective on what that means, typically a university has a 2-year window to make their full number.
Right.
Traditional universities will target high school students during their sophomore years, as early as their sophomore years, typically during their junior years, and that recruitment effort, continues through their senior years. But I've seen institutions do it as early as their sophomore year. So if you consider that institutions have at least 2 years or more to build their fall enrollment incoming class, how do you take that operation, okay, or how do you take any resource that work within that operation and expect them to, for example, return an inquiry request or attempt to reach out to an inquiring prospects within a half an hour of having received that information request?
Yeah.
Culturally speaking, that in itself is a clash right there and then.
Okay.
Because you have an infrastructure that does not need to have that heightened level of urgency to make their number, if you will, right? And you're asking them to now significantly accelerate how they manage their funnels.
So did you take the existing team and retrain, or do you think you're going to start from scratch?
Well, that's what I was getting at, which is right. Depending on the institutions, you have a couple of options. One is, yes, you could retrain a team, which I typically do not recommend. You do not want to have a team that has conflicting or that works with a conflicting set of metrics. For this type of student, we manage it this way. For this other type of students, we manage it differently.
Right.
It's going to clash. It's going to create operational challenges. You can, however, take some of the resources in your traditional operational setting and retrain those people to manage just the needs of return adult student population, right?
Okay.
Or applicants. Now, people ask me, okay, but you still have the challenge of how do you integrate, synchronize efforts across these various functions? Well, what you do is you without giving away the sauce here, okay? Ultimately, you want to assign resources from the various functional areas to work for the team that specializes or manages, directly manages the return adult student or online prospective student funnel, right?
Okay.
And those people, of course, will report back to a centralized location, if you will, or a centralized function, but they work as part of an integrated enrollment management organization, serving the needs of that online division, that return adult student funnel, and so on.
You had mentioned, that cycle time of sometimes upwards of 2 years for the traditional student. What do you think it really is for the online student? What's the consideration period?
Well, it depends. You have some institutions that offer online starts only twice a year. Some online universities, I shouldn't say online universities because we're talking about universities that have well-established traditional settings, but those universities that also offer online, sometimes offer more starts per year than they do for their traditional setting, right, for their traditional campus. So first and foremost, it depends on that. But let's just for the sake of argument, assume that you have 6 stars per year, which is rather common. Okay. And that those terms are 8-week terms.
Okay.
It's very typical of traditional institutions that have, your typical, fall, spring, summer terms to have somewhere between 4 and 6. So let's just say 6 8-week terms. So if you're recruiting for, let's say, 100 students for a term of 8 weeks that starts in September, about 90% of the students that will start in that term will be realized, for lack of a better term, from inquiries that were received during the previous 90 to 120 days.
Okay.
And that's why is that? Because again, you don't have the luxury of, let's say, for traditional education, you go to a list broker. Let's call it, you go NRCCOA. Some people call it NARCUA, or a College Board. You buy a list of students that have either recently taken the SAT or that have recently completed that survey at their high school, and then you can start communicating with those people. But the problem here is that the other way around. While traditional high school students oftentimes will reach out to the institution first, in online education, 99% of the time, what happens is the prospective online student will reach out to the institution first. And they don't reach out to just one institution. They reach out on average to 3+ institutions.
Okay.
So what happens is, if you're unable to get back to them within a half an hour, if you're unable to synchronize your communications, your application materials management in such a way that you can stay, abreast of your competitors, right? They are going to end up enrolling at another institution. So why? Because, and again, I'm simplifying this somewhat, but I want you to think about it this way. There are institutions out there, and I'm not talking about for-profit operations that have figured out how to maximize productivity. Okay, I'm talking about not-for-profit, regionally accredited, 4-year campus-based institutions that have thriving online programs that are capable of, within 2 weeks, taking a committed inquiring prospect through the application process and registration, right? So if that's the baseline, and you're unable to figure out how to, integrate and synchronize your efforts in such a way that you can compete at that level, those people are going to go elsewhere. So when I say to you that 90% of enrollments will come from inquiries received in the preceding 90 to 120 days, okay, you got to understand that those are all people that will be talking to at least 2 other institutions at their engagement with you. And if the other institutions are able to get back to them with, this is how many credits will transfer in, this is how you're going to pay for your education, these are the textbooks you need, and so on, before you do, they're going to choose the other institution.
Okay. So when you came to Post and, you worked with your team to roll out some of these new processes, and especially when it comes to impacting internal existing team members, like on the enrollment team, did you face resistance?
Yes, you do, and there are different levels of resistance. Integrating functional efforts almost always results in somewhat of a turf war. Who's going to control resources and how?
Right.
The degree to which, for example, if you have a member of financial aid working for in support of an integrated enrollment management organization serving the needs of an online division, who that person reports to? To the School of Online or the School of Continuing Education, or does that person report back to financial aid? And so what I typically run into is a conversation along those lines, who controls what and how that is controlled. Typical argument from financial aid will be, fine, you can have someone that will help you figure out how to more effectively and more rapidly or speedy process what we need in order to put together an aid package, but no one outside of the centralized location can certify alone, right? Right. So those conversations, ultimately, while you're going to run into resistance, you're going to run into territorial disputes even. What's important, the takeaway here is not that you're going to run into some form of political complexity as a result of trying to integrate various functional areas or efforts, is that you need to actually provide all of these stakeholders with absolute and complete transparency on how the process works. Give them an opportunity to weigh in, to participate, to understand, to provide perhaps even recommendations, because I assure you that what has worked at institution A will not necessarily work verbatim, if you will, at institution B. Mm-hmm. The implementation of the same strategy should not be the same. You should see from one institution to the other one some level of variation. And that variation is something that can only be or the degree to which a variation goes into, comes into play, something that can only be uncovered by truly understanding the inner workings of the institution that you're currently working with, right? Okay. And those stakeholders are the ones that will give you the insight into their operation that will allow you to identify the degree to which you need to make minor adjustments from what was done at another institution.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, once you've kind of established really where the resistance lies and who's going to kind of help you navigate that, how are you able to keep the team members motivated and wanting to work towards your common goal?
We're talking about the admissions team, we're talking about marketing. There are different ways to do that. People get concerned sometimes that, when it comes to online education, it's all about enrollments, mm-hmm. And it's not. Part of it is cultural. The teams that I've worked with over the years ultimately came down to this. What is it that we do? And ultimately, with all is said and done, if you're working for a reputable institution, that is able to deliver to its students a reputable education, a return on investment on their tuition dollars, mm-hmm. if you will, then you're part of something that's much greater than just getting an enrollment. You're part of helping people improve their lives. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, setting the right tone within the organization is critical. Another thing is you need to realize, we're talking about some internal conflict on the degree to which you get pushback and so on. It's important to empower people to take charge and give them an opportunity to shine. Okay. So one example that I can give is, look, so I was telling you earlier how, we had a couple of hiccups at Post. So at one point, we had 12,000 plus or minus inquiries that we never reached out to and so on. So that's a bit spot, right? And when things are not working, when the going gets tough, what I have found in my experience is that, some people run for the trenches and other people will run up the hill and charge and go, let's get this done. Well, you want to make sure you build a culture that empowers people to feel that they can do that. They can jump out the trench, they can take charge, they can take the bull by the horns, if you will. And that's one way. So first is the tone. What is it that we do? What's the culture? What's our mission? And what's the vision of the institution? We're helping people improve their lives. That's the foundation. Second is each and every one of the people on the team needs to understand that they are as impactful to the organization as anyone else can be, and that they are empowered to provide ideas, take charge. Look, we had a tough year. Again, 12,000 plus or minus inquiries were never contacted. We thought we were doing great. We were not. I for obvious reasons, I cannot get into the specifics of what happened operationally, but I can tell you, it was one of those incredibly difficult conversations when you don't know the degree to which your job may even be on the line, okay? And, so we talk about keeping people motivated when fields are not doing well. That's, it's 10 times more harder, right? But we had a person that stood up, or stepped up, I should say, and came to us and says, look, these are some of the challenges that I've identified within the enrollment management operation. I know how to fix them. I can do this. And the answer was, okay, go ahead. You cannot shy away from the possibility that someone may be able to provide you with a solution, right? I think sometimes institutions tend to be rigid, hierarchical. They don't necessarily look within the ranks for leadership. The person in question, the person that I'm telling you about, was an enrollment counselor that within, I don't know, plus or minus 4 years, became the executive vice president of enrollment management.
Wow.
Okay, and that's it. So how do you keep people motivated? The cultural foundation. This is what we do, why we do it, and the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Ensuring that people understand that you don't have to spend the rest of your life making phone calls to inquiring prospects. Okay, show me that you can get something done. Show me that you have ideas that are impactful. Do something that is pivoting to the organization, and you will have an opportunity to engage at a high level.
Great. So how do you measure success? I mean, you're talking about, marketing dollars, inquiry generation, nurturing, ultimately driving enrollments, and then retention and shows.
Yeah.
How do you connect all the dots and measure success at different points in the funnel?
Yeah. Look, ultimately it's about outcomes. I have seen institutions that place too much emphasis on making their enrollment number.
Okay.
And then within within a term, 50 or more percent of those students are no longer with them.
Right.
And to me it's about retention.
Do you consider that part of this whole process?
It is, absolutely. Because if you think about it, how you market to students, how you recruit students, the messaging, what's the messaging strategy? What do you tell your enrollment advisors? So if you have an enrollment advisor on the phone that tells students, look, online is straightforward, it's easier, it's not as difficult as main campus or traditional campus, well, wrong.
Right.
Okay? The reality is most traditional universities would not do that to begin with, but ultimately you have to be careful on how the online is presented because, excuse me, the online should be as challenging to anyone as any of the degree programs that you currently offer, regardless of the delivery method, right? So people need to understand, say, look, you're going to have homework. You're going to have to complete your assignments on time. You cannot slack.
Right.
Okay, if you slack, you're not going to get a good grade. People need to take this seriously. So if you manage recruitment efforts from a messaging strategy, if you will, on target, if you manage it well, then students enroll into the program with their expectations set in the right tone, right? So people will go in fully understanding what they need to do to succeed. And then your probability of attrition within the first term is minimized.
Okay.
Not necessarily eradicated, right? But minimized. So think about this. These are the metrics that I look at: persistency, first, second, third degree. First, second, third course completion.
Okay.
Okay. Persistency meaning how many courses it take per term. Too many courses.
Right.
Maybe a problem. Too few courses could also be a problem. Depends on which courses are taken. The probability of academic success. If you actually do a regression analysis on academic performance, you'll find that, for example, the probability of online students failing and withdrawing from the program while taking a quantitative course for the first time is much higher than the probability of the same happening while taking any other course, right? So if you know that that's happening, why wouldn't you proactively present those students with a academic support infrastructure to manage the probability of them not doing well academically, right? As opposed to what most institutions do too, which is reacting to the student didn't get a good midterm grade, and now the faculty member is raising a flag which academic support will pick up, and someone on the academic support is going to reach out to the students and say, hey, I just saw that you flunked the midterm, how can I help you?
Right.
In online education, 8-week terms, 10-week terms, too late.
Right.
So ultimately, when you start looking at all these moving parts, right, it's what leads to high persistency or on a persistency that's adequate, leading to a high retention rate and a higher probability of completion and therefore graduation. Those are the things you got to look at. And it begins really with how you manage your marketing, your recruitment, your messaging strategy, how you manage the prospective students' expectations going into the program.
Okay. Great. I have one final question before we open up the floor. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, beautiful thing about these type of opportunities, right, is I think a lot of people can relate to what I'm about to say. Sometimes you go into it thinking you know what you're doing. And, I don't know if this is because I'm talking about going back in time and talking to myself, or perhaps because I've grown a bit wiser with the years. Could be a little bit of both. But ultimately, you don't know what you're doing. Right. It start with the foundation that you don't necessarily know what you're doing, that you don't understand all of the moving parts, that you don't understand the metrics, that you really need to take the time to analyze and dissect the operation and your current capabilities as opposed to make assumptions of what's working and what's not.
Okay.
Okay, just because you have, for example, a head of a functional department that has been there for 20 years does not mean that that person, despite his or her experience, can manage a different process for a different target audience.
Great, thank you. So we're going to take some questions from the attendees next. If you have a question, you can type it into the question box on your webinar control panel. If you can't see the control panel, look for the orange box with the arrow, click on the arrow, and the control panel will expand, allowing for you to type in your questions. We actually have been receiving some throughout this interview, so I will start with those, if you don't mind, Marcelo.
Absolutely.
Okay, our first question is, how important does diversity of programs play into the overall enrollment scalability? Is it important at all? Does doing 1 to 5 programs really well impact growth more than doing 12 to 15 on an average level?
Good question. I give an example, right? If you look at what Southern New Hampshire University has done, they have over 200 programs, right? Well over 200 programs, and they've managed to reach enrollments of, I don't know, last time I checked, 75,000 students or something like that. Now, most traditional universities, frankly, don't want to do that.
Right.
They want to maybe, if they have, for the sake of argument, a student population of 10, 15,000 students, traditional on-ground population, maybe they want 500 or 1,000 or at the most 2,500 online students, and that's it, they're done.
Right.
So when you look at that, the question becomes not necessarily how many programs, but rather which programs.
Okay.
Okay, so I think institutions oftentimes fell prey to what's working on ground.
Okay.
Okay, which is not necessarily always aligned to the needs of the return adult student or how the return adult student will approach the market. It's important to conduct, market research into what are the programs that are most relevant to the target audience. And you begin with, first and foremost, what is the region in which you operate? So, just to give you an idea, most online institutions, regardless of size, on-ground campuses or not, most online institutions realize the bulk of their enrollments in their own backyard. So if you actually have a campus location, for the sake of argument, in New York, New York City, chances are that if you have online enrollments, 60+% of your students will be from the greater New York metropolitan area.
Due to brand?
Well, it's, what it is to some degree psychological. I've interviewed a lot of students over the years, and it's psychological, meaning the idea that you can actually visit the campus, go and touch the brick and mortar institution, if you will, be able to walk in and complain is appealing to people. Okay. So the probability of you enrolling someone in your vicinity, if you will, is much higher than beyond. So if that's the case, you really have to engage in identify what are the challenges in that regional market, right? So how many competing institutions do you have? Question one, do you really understand what competitive institution means? Who you're competing with in that regional market? The regional market is 60 to 120 miles around your campus location if you offer an online program. So in that radius, do you understand what's being offered, what competitors, who your real competitors are, if you're an Ivy League institution, just to give you an idea, right? Competitors are not just Ivy League institutions. There are other institutions that compete with you. Most importantly, if you have any type of institution and you have an online degree program, to make the assumption that another online program does not compete with yours because that institution is not like so is a big mistake.
Okay.
Right? So you need to understand the regional marketplace, what programs are available in the marketplace, the degree to which you have a crowded landscape, saturation. If typical example, too many universities, and the number of online MBAs is staggering. So the probability of you achieving a high number of online enrollments for that online MBA is probably limited, dependent, again, on your market, your brand, a number of variables, but probably limited nevertheless. On the other hand, if you're offering a Bachelor of Science in Accounting, the probability may be higher.
Okay.
If it's a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, it may be higher. But the question then becomes, again, your market. Do you understand the competitive landscape?
Right.
Do you understand the job market looks like? These are not necessarily things that traditional universities, when it comes to traditional campuses, don't look at.
Right.
But I do believe that sometimes they make, again, I go back in time, tell myself, don't make assumptions. Just because it's working at your traditional institution, it does not mean it will translate well to the needs of the retired adult population in your regional market.
Okay, great point. What marketing channels did you use at Post, and what do you believe had the greatest impact?
Okay, so if you think about this, there's always one straightforward way to look at this. Especially when it comes to retired adult students considering online education, I don't care how you slice it, bottom line is a person will, somewhere along the line, do a Google search.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, it does not matter how they heard about your brand. It will either begin or culminate with a Google search. Okay. So digital marketing is important. Unless, of course, you have an incredibly well-established regional brand, and your research indicates that you can grow your online enrollments just relying on that regional brand and your, for example, alumni network, which some institutions can do that. But many institutions find themselves in a unique situation where, they may have a strong regional brand, but they don't necessarily are positioned or identify as an option for distance education by retired adult students, right? So if that's the case, I'll repeat the question again. So
what marketing channels?
The marketing channels. So if that's the case, right, the first thing you got to do is maximize your share of voice in the digital landscape.
Okay.
Because regardless of how you look at it, that Google search, if you will take place. How you maximize share of voice? There are a number of ways to do it. What I used was, typically search engine organization. Today, that has evolved to content marketing as well, right? Ensuring that your content is relevant to to what prospective students are looking for improves the probability of having higher rankings, right? Social media today clearly has taken a very important role. You have paid search, critical. Most people don't realize, in fact, that the combination of strong search engine optimization, paid search, and a sound content marketing strategy will pretty much give you the foundation to build the funnel that will probably realize no less than 40 to even 50% of your class. Okay, there are other channels. Some people engage with affiliate or aggregator channels. Word of caution, you got to manage those carefully if you want to go that route. Some of them are very effective, other ones are not. You really want to make sure that you work with an expert that really understands how to best optimize and manage those. It is a good way to increase share of voice, but there are details that go into that most traditional institutions don't necessarily understand. And lastly, something that, by the way, I will put a lot of emphasis on is traditional media. Traditional media can be a very effective way of not only increasing brand awareness overall, but most importantly, impacting digital traffic. Okay, so what I've used historically has been a fully integrated offline, online mix, with the systems in place to really effectively measure the return on investment on your initiatives. And if you don't have those systems in place, that's something that we can walk you through if need be.
Thank you. Do you have any tips on how to convince people internally that they do in fact compete with larger online schools? I'm assuming this relates to maybe a traditional school launching an online program competing with the Southern New Hampshires of the world.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, if I recall correctly, sometimes, this requires empirical proof.
Okay.
Okay. You can go into an institution, a traditional, regionally accredited, so I'm working for in NIAS accredited institutions. This is New England Association of Schools and Colleges, so it's a regionally accredited 4-year campus, so on. And I indicated to this institution that, well, these top 10 institutions are likely to be your primary competitors in the online landscape. And one of those 10 was a for-profit university. So I got a lot of pushback, to say the least. I'm like, no, we don't compete with that type of institution. We're not a for-profit institution. The whole back and forth about the differences between not-for-profit, regional accredited, and for-profit institutions. So I asked their financial aid department to give me a report on, I don't know if you're aware of this, but institutions, you can get a report that tells you which are the institutions to which one of your prospective students submitted a FAFSA.
Okay.
Or put in a FAFSA request. The way it works when you apply for financial aid is, you fill up a FAFSA, free application for federal financial aid, something like that, and then the institutions get the student information report. It's called an ISER, right? But there is a report an institution can get that will tell them, in addition to having requested a FAFSA for, or an ISER for this institution, they also submitted the same request to.
Got it.
Okay. Southern New Hampshire, or in this case, Grand Canyon University, which is, as close as you can get to a traditional regionally accredited university while being a for-profit, right? Because they are in fact regionally accredited. They have a traditional campus. They have NCAA sports, but they also happen to be for-profit. And so people sometimes get caught up on who do we compete with or not at a very superficial level, right? And it's important to understand who really your prospective students will engage with when considering their options.
Okay. How much should we budget for the marketing of our online programs if we want to increase enrollment numbers?
Very interesting. Great question. And I tell you why it's a great question, because I would have approached it the exact same way, at the beginning of my distance education career, if you will. That's an answer. You need an answer for that, but ultimately the question becomes for what programs and what are your enrollment goals, right? And again, you have to begin with, what's your regional marketing, what's the competitive landscape looks like. So the degree to which you're going to be able to carve share of voice that will effectively help you build a funnel to reach those enrollment goals will impact, your cost metrics. So the way typically you look at distance education is, what is your cost per application? What is your cost per enrollment? Now, if you want me to give you ranges, I can tell you that typically, and take this with a grain of salt, typically a cost per enrollment, this is not necessarily a start, for distance education ranges anywhere between $1,800 and $3,500, depending on degree programs, the degree level, so on, markets and so on. I've seen some that are lower, I've seen some that are higher. What institutions need to look at then is the degree to which, given persistency, retention, and so on, the life cycle, the life value of that student, the overall return on investment on the marketing and enrollment management efforts translate to a profitable proposition. And ultimately, regardless if a university for-profit or not, they cannot run an operation where the cost to market significantly exceeds the tuition revenue that the institution will generate, right? So that is nothing to do with for-profit status. It's just a matter of some business practice, that's applicable to any type of institution. So it would be easier for me to tell you, look, take the total number of students that you're targeting for your upcoming term, multiply that by a given cost per enrollment or a given cost per start, and that's just taking the ground. But it would be irresponsible of me to give you those numbers, because ultimately I would need to understand your specific situation in more detail.
Okay. Did you use outside online study portals to generate inquiries? If so, how many programs did you advertise there, and which programs received the most conversions?
Outside study portals?
Yes.
Not 100% certain that I understand what you mean by outside portals, but I can tell you that I used a lot of third-party portals. Somebody wants to clarify what an outside study portal is, gladly. Now, in terms of third-party portals and generating enrollments, this is a question, right? Yeah, it varies. I've seen performance in terms of conversions or even inquiry generation on third-party portals range from poor to excellent. Again, it really ties back to the specifics of your institution. If you provide me with a specific example of what portal or portals you're talking about, I will gladly expand on that.
We have
answer.
an update, a Keystone portal that generates online leads.
Okay, well, all right, good one. So I would like, this is applicable to any type of, portals like Keystone, a Keystone program. What's truly important is how that inquiry is generated. You really need to understand the degree to which people that engage with your brand through one of these portals are in fact engaging with your brand, and not with a generalized idea, and not with another institution. I don't know if those of you that understand what cross-registration, cross-reg, they call it in digital marketing. One of the most simplistic cross-registration tactics in third-party portals like this one is, people that have requested information on this institution have also requested information on these other institutions. Click here to receive information from those institutions as well. Okay, so what happens? You represent institution 1, and you put in an insertion order for this third-party website to get inquiries. And you have a lot of people that are requesting information for institution 2, but through this cross-registration process, we're also selecting institutions 1, 3, 4, and 5. The degree to which those consumers or prospective students are able to recall your brand is, well, significantly impacted by the degree to which this cross-registration is the main driver of your inquiries or not. So you really need to understand the qualification process. What leads, that prospective student to your brand? If it's a direct selection, the student wanted to speak to that brand, your probability of conversion is much higher regardless of the degree program. If they selected another brand and you were an afterthought, if you will, the probability of conversion is going to be incredibly low, probably not an effective channel. It is important that you understand that. Lastly, when it comes to share of voice, you really want to understand where your information, your brand, your content is being published. A lot of times, we engage with these third-party portals, and you visit their landing pages or their portals or their websites, and you're unable to find your brand, because it's not necessarily at that portal that the interest is being generated. So it goes back to putting a stake on the ground on what your cost per enrollment would be or what your marketing budget should be. You really want to partner with an organization that understands digital marketing and understands third-party portals and the various channels that go into managing your integrated marketing efforts to gain the insight on how to most effectively manage these type of portals.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. What is your advice to someone who sees changes that need to be made but is being blocked by their department supervisor?
Well, yeah. Is more common than you think, okay? What I found to be most effective is documentation. Documentation will almost always result in someone having to react to it, right? A paper trail, if you will. Now, the challenge with that is that, depending on who you're talking about and what the working relationship may be, you could, I don't know the specifics, right? But if you're not careful, you run into a political problem, right? So I can't necessarily tell you how to handle your specific situation, but I will tell you this much. In my experience, documentations always help. So if you have a situation that there is a roadblock, if you can demonstrate in writing and provide the evidence on how a given roadblock is preventing the institution from, successfully or effectively enrolling or managing applicants in such a way that maximizes the probability of enrollment, the probability of start, or the probability of retention. If you have something that you can document, you make that documentation public, if you will. Right? You start with your supervisors and say, look, here's an analysis of what's happening. Most importantly, here's the solution. Don't go just with the problem. Put in front of your supervisor the analysis of the problem and a proposed solution. If you don't get a reaction on that point, well, I'll defer to you on how you want to manage that internally. But that's the beginning. Well-documented process leading to a roadblock that prevents a specific something that's measurable, okay, plus a proposed solution that will always work. I mean, not always, but 99% of the time. When it doesn't work, typically is when people do not bring with the highlighted challenge a proposed solution. That's critical.
Great. I think we have our last question for the day. We have an assessment that allows adult students to earn up to 30 hours in one day. Would you use traditional media to create brand awareness or just try to push traffic to our website via paid search?
Both. Both, yeah, and it's very interesting. A lot of institutions give credit for prior learning or work experience, life experience, and if you can earn 30 hours, you have a very strong, I guess, for lack of a better phrase for now, unique selling proposition, right? So I highly recommend that a messaging strategy that can be applied to both offline and online channels. That's a very, very strong proposition. So yes, it would work in both. Frankly, I believe it would work slightly better on traditional marketing if you know how to effectively manage that mix. A word of caution, traditional marketing, as many of you probably know, is, when you look at broadcast alone, network TV or cable or radio, if managed well, can be incredibly impactful. If managed poorly, or if what you go with is what the network recommends, I mean, you're gonna go for a lot of money and achieve little, right? So again, it goes back to make sure you partner with an agency that is not necessarily vested on how many marketing dollars you spend, but rather the metrics of success. It's all about outcomes. So you want to make sure you work with an agency that will look at outcomes and not necessarily how much money we can spend. Oftentimes, I sat on the CMO seat a number of times, and networks or agencies will come to you with, what's your budget? Right. Wrong question. What are you looking to achieve is the right question, and how do we get there is the right question. And they based on what they understand and what you understand and where you are today, and an analysis of the competitive landscape and so on. You should be able to put a stake in the ground, which does not necessarily mean you have to commit 100% of your budget allocation to that tactic. It means we're going to test it out. We're going to make sure the numbers work. We're going to make sure we get the applications, the enrollments, and if that works, right, with those small tests and it works, then we'll figure out how to scale it, and we'll do it conservatively so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everything today, Marcelo, and thank you everyone on the call for joining us. I know I see some questions still coming in, and I'm sure there's going to be more after, so if you'd like to learn more, you can send an email to webinars@sparkroom.com, and either Marcelo or I will get back to you with answers to your questions. We wish all of you great success in your future. Have a wonderful day and a great holiday season. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your time. For more performance marketing resources, including our series of on-demand webinars, go to sparkroom.com/resources.